In India, buying a car is considered a sign of prosperity. Indians plan a car purchase on special occasions. Many believe it also brings luck. But have you tried buying a new car recently? You will need some serious luck to get the car you want. Because there's a massive shortage, deliveries are delayed for months, car makers have tens of thousands of pending orders, factories are being shut, and thousands have been laid off. A crisis is brewing in the auto sector, not just in India but across the world. It's a crisis that threatens to bring the global economy down, and it's happening because of chips. A computer chip is what we're talking about, what you call a semiconductor. These are small chips. The world has run out of them. Supplies are short and automakers are losing billions of dollars because of this. There is a massive global shortage of chips, and almost everything in our world today runs on these computer chips. So the demand is very high. Everyone wants them. 169 industries are suffering due to this chip shortage, 169 industries. But no one is bleeding as much as the auto sector. They're unable to make cars. The auto industry is projected to lose $210 billion this year because of chip shortage. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. So who can solve the problem? Well, India can, and it's trying to do that. New Delhi has come up with a bold proposition for chip makers. It is willing to extend $10 billion in incentives to them, $10 billion. In return, they must make their chips in India. If New Delhi gets this right, it stands to win big. Not only will it solve the problem of chips, India's push can break China's monopoly on global supply chains. China has a maximum share in key aspects of the chip business. According to the Boston Consulting Group, 35% of the world's chips are manufactured or assembled in China. India can challenge that. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you about the crisis in the auto sector and what India is doing to help. First of all, let's dissect the problem. There is a shortage of chips or semiconductors. They're used everywhere these days, from small gadgets like smartphones, computers, tablets, and smartwatches to bigger machines like cars and medical devices. Almost everything runs on chips. And that's one of the reasons why there is a shortage. The problem began last year itself. The lockdowns forced everyone to move indoors. The demand for gadgets shot up. People were buying more devices for work and to keep themselves entertained during lockdowns. The result was this: manufacturers began hoarding chips. And this has created a scarcity, one that the world is still dealing with. For some industries, the shortage is a manageable problem. But for one industry, this shortage is a crisis. And that's the auto industry. There is a massive backlog. Buyers are being forced to wait for months. They can't get their new cars anytime soon. In India alone, 700,000 people are waiting for their new cars. 700,000. Maruti is the biggest seller of cars in India. It has a backlog of 250,000. Other major brands like Hyundai, Tata Motors, Mahindra, they all have 100,000 outstanding orders each. Newer car makers like Kia and MG Motors are also keeping thousands of their customers waiting for new cars. Even luxury brands like Mercedes have a backlog. What about the rest of the world? Car makers around the world are counting their losses already. This year, the auto industry, like I told you, is set to lose $210 billion in revenue. They cannot roll out new cars even if they want to. This year, automakers will produce 7.7 million less cars. And most of the loss in output is because of chip shortage. And this has far-reaching consequences well beyond this industry. Let me tell you how car shortage impacts the global economy. The auto industry accounts for 3% of global economic output. 3% might sound like a small number, but economies of several states and countries depend on the auto sector. Take the example of Japan. It is home to car makers like Toyota and Nissan. Japanese automakers are not performing to their full potential because of a shortage of parts. The result is this: in September this year, exports from Japan dropped by a whopping 46%. And you don't have to be an economist to know that drops like these, 46%, can push a country into recession. Central Europe is also feeling the shock. Their output of cars dropped by 20% by August. We're talking about countries like the Czech Republic and Slovakia. In the Czech Republic, car makers are responsible for around 9% of their GDP. Since they're not performing, the country's growth forecast has been cut from 4% to 1.9%. Same with Slovakia. It gets 13% of its GDP and 46% of its exports from the auto sector. 46%. Earlier this year, the National Bank of Slovakia made a quote-unquote significant downward revision to its GDP. Slovakia will not grow more than 3.5% this year. What about India? How much is the shortage hurting India? The auto sector accounts for 6.4% of India's GDP. The sector as a whole generates more than 30 million jobs. So it is imperative that this sector is revived. And that will not happen until the chip shortage is resolved. So far, there is no recovery in sight. Going by one estimate, the shortage could continue into the next year. And manufacturers will be forced to redesign their cars to cut back on the usage of chips. That is, unless someone else starts supplying more chips. And that's where India comes in. That's what India plans to do, supply chips. So New Delhi is reaching out to the world's biggest chip makers. The proposal before them is quite simple. Set up manufacturing units in India and the government will pay up to 50% of the project cost. 50%. There is a separate plan to incentivize local firms. About 100 Indian companies working on chip design could benefit from this plan. It's a win-win for all. India's plan is already generating interest, we can tell you. Israel's Tower Semiconductor, Taiwan's Foxconn and a consortium from Singapore have all shown interest in setting up chip factories in India. This is a very significant move. Incentivizing chip manufacturers is a forward-looking step. India is investing in a sector that is ripe for growth in the future. But for the plan to work, India needs large-scale chip manufacturing. The plan must solve big problems like the global chip shortage. Only then will India have a permanent place in the global supply chains. So this, we say, is a good start. It will have implications both on the global economy and on geopolitics. Economy, because you help the world deal with the shortage, and politics, because you create alternatives to China. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.